minutes till the show starts. 4 minutes till the show starts. Three and a half minutes till the show starts. Minutes till the show starts. Two and a half minutes till the show starts. Two minutes till the show starts. One and a half minutes till the show starts. And a half minute till the show starts. One minute till show time. 30 seconds till show time! Ten, 9.
Damn, boy. That's That's a thick ass boy. Damn, boy. That's a thick ass boy.
Welcome to the show. I never know how to fucking start these things. So that's your intro for the day. So yeah, let me get my my version up so that I can read what everybody's saying. Damn boy, this is one thick boy. Feeling mega tick today, bruh. And my arm hurts a little bit trying to lay it down. Thank you to my man Jonas yesterday. We decided to, can't really see it right now. Okay, well, you know, fucking elbow, swellbow. God damn it. And on the inside, that shit that sucks. It fucking sucks. It fudging sucks. Yeah, so there was no show last week. I was completely overwhelmed by work. There was no way I could come home and fully give my all to my audience. I don't feel like I would have been pleased with the production. I don't feel like y'all would have been pleased with the production. I mean, you would have been like real nice and stuff because that's how my friends are, but you know, I wouldn't have been particularly pleased with it. Surprised this Space Jam part is not getting cut. Oh, is it? No, it's not getting chroma keyed. That would be fucking cool though if the Space Jam part was getting keyed out. Getting keyed out. Yeah. So you know, we're probably, you know, a little bit behind on what was going on last week. Futterman's dead, and you know, they just decided to completely multiply and go crazy and go all over the town. There's been some good stuff going on. The J is cut. The yay. What? What are you talking about? Oh, the J is cut off on Space Jam. Oh. Well, that's actually, it's like this. Like that. Like Spacey Yam, actually. If you didn't know. The J is silent. It's like yogging. But yeah, there's been you know, we are ready for the big showdown, my friends. The real big finale, the final countdown, the final what the fuck ever you want it to be. The final, God, I love it. Gizmo, Billy, Kate versus Stripe and the rest of the gimp. Oh, you can see through it. Oh, no. Well, a little dead air then. You smart ass. Enjoy this. Yeah, there's a whole bunch of stuff going on. But, yeah, we're at this really good conclusion. We're at chapter 18. I've written myself some really good notes this time, so that we shouldn't have any problems with being exhausted or any of those sorts of issues that was having before. Yeah. We're going to be trudging through this for the last time, and then we have a special book starting next Monday. Something out of left field that you weren't going to know about. You're just not going to know about. You're going to be like, what the actual fudge? Like, what in the actual heck? Like, why in the where of the who? Chapter 18. Dummy, she thought. You had the opportunity to get out of this place, but you blew it. It wasn't that long a chance, and making it would have involved a little shoving, but you had to act civilized and cool and sophisticated. So now you're a civilized, cool, and sophisticated prisoner, she mused, not going easily on the self-recriminations. It's even worse than that, she muttered under her breath as she poured another round of drinks. It's a new definition of perpetual motion. I'm the only waitress for the thirstiest, meanest, sloppiest bunch of drunks in the world. What a living nightmare. Trapped behind a long rectangular bar at Dory's, when the torrent of green demons poured through the door and enveloped her like a snag in a seam, Kate had initially diverted the gremlins' attention by mixing and pouring drinks as fast as she could and passing them around. It had worked, or at least until the unruly mob from murdering her, or, as they used to say in cheap fiction, subjecting her to a fate worse than death. The problem was that there was no time to think, much less plan a hasty and safe exit. As soon as she filled one batch of glasses, another batch of empties was plunked down in front of her by a leering, giggling, slimy-fanged customer. One consoling factor emerged as she carried out her arm-wearying ordeal. They weren't particular. At first, Kate had mixed real cocktails, Manhattans, martinis, whiskey sours, but soon it became obvious they would drink anything. So when a bottle of bourbon ran out, she added rum or tequila or whatever was handy to the drink. One gremlin sitting at the end of the bar even developed a taste for bitters, throwing a tantrum when Kate finally ran out. Now, though, not much more than half an hour had passed since the gremlins had arrived. Kate was exhausted, and Dory's pub looked like a cross between party headquarters on election night and Ohana Beach the morning after D-Day. The air, smelly and sticky, was filled with flying objects, bottles, glasses, cue sticks, billiard balls, chairs, whatever was not nailed down. A raucous babble of foreign sounds, squeals, and high-pitched giggling kept the tension level dangerously high. Amid the noise, a few passed-out bodies lay on the floor, which oozed and spilled drinks, bits of food, and crushed popcorn. Kate fought back increasingly powerful urges to scream and make a sudden rush for the door. Acts which she knew would call attention to her and perhaps seal her fate forever. Just keep calm, she murmured over and over again. Sooner or later, there'll be a chance to make a break, or help will come, or they'll all pass out at once. She wasn't sure she believed it, but it made sense to continue serving them. At least she was invisible, or visible only when they needed a drink. As more gremlins drifted into the pub and supplies began to run low, however, the devilish creatures began more onerous and overbearing. Although she could not understand their language, Kate noted that the typical gremlin drunk and the human counterpart displayed the same impatience when service didn't keep up with their needs. Faces leered openly, no longer bothering to feign coolness. Some seemed to delight in holding her up, shouting in her ears, deliberately spilling drinks, anything to keep her from doing her job. Where is everybody? She hissed between clenched teeth. Aren't there any cops in this town? Suddenly, a cigar-sucking gremlin popped up in front of her, waiting to be served. Kate poured him a drink. Screeching angrily, he threw the glass and its contents onto the crowd near the pool table, clawed the counter, and seemed to leap at Kate. What? She yelled. The creature gestured to the dead cigar. Why didn't you say so? Kate muttered. She located the butane lighter and moved it quickly toward the gremlin's face, snapping it on. A jet of flame 6 inches high shot from the lighter, causing the gremlin to squint, grunt in pain, and stumble backwards. Sorry, Kate murmured. As she adjusted the flame to a lower level, a plan was forming in her mind. Those rules Billy mentioned when he turned the Mogwai over to Mr. Hanson, wasn't one of them something about avoiding bright direct light? Of course. Kate reassured herself that's why the gremlin with the cigar didn't care much for the high flame when it came close to his eyes. Kate looked around. If direct light were her ally, she was mired deep in enemy territory. Why couldn't she have been trapped in a bank or an office building? Then her only problem would have been getting to the switches in order to turn on the overhead lights and escape in the pain and confusion. Dory's pub was a completely different situation. Dimly lit, there was not an overhead light throughout the entire lounge area. They called it romantic, old-fashioned, cozy, but for Kate, it was a trap. Unless Dory kept a flashlight or two behind the bar, she had no way of using light as a secret weapon. He's got to have a flashlight, she thought, flinging open doors and panels, all the while continuing her duties as waitress, punching bag, and slave to the green masses at the bar. Probably having gotten bored with pool, video games, food, and drink, she noted that they were becoming more and more obnoxious. Kate was gradually losing her patience too, her annoyance and fear rising as she went through one drawer filled with useless junk after another. "I can't believe it," she whispered angrily. "There's nothing, absolutely nothing. How can a bar not have a flashlight behind the counter?" There were several packs of matches, she noticed, all gaily decorated in green and white with the outline of a four-leafed clover, a shillelagh, and the telephone number and the address of Dory's pub. For a moment, she toyed with the idea of setting them on fire one pack at a time and holding them before her, forcing the gremlins to retreat like Dracula from a crucifix. Lots of luck, she thought. Such a strategy might irritate the closest gremlins, but there was so little shock value in a pack of slowly burning matches. She had no faith in the plan. "Still," she mused, "if it's the only game in town." A claw reached around her waist as a second, not belonging to the same owner, grabbed at her arm. Twisting away, Kate walked quickly to the middle of the bar, trying not to appear frightened or intimidated. The two gremlins followed, elbowing their way through the double and triple layers of fellow carousers packed along the rail of the bar. Clutched in her left hand, which she carefully but casually tucked beneath her apron, were the packs of matches. Kate's only slim hope, if she could get them all in a single ashtray and light the whole thing at once. Maybe, just maybe. Two more gremlins, seated at center bar, reached out for her, the more aggressive one lying flat on his belly in order to grab Kate's thigh. As he did so, a roar of approbation burst from the other gremlins near the scene. Reacting instinctively, Kate picked up the nearest bottle and slammed it alongside the gremlin's head, not pulling her punch in the slightest degree. A heavy liquid thunk, like a cantaloupe hitting the floor, told her the blow was a solid one. As the creature nosedived onto the bar, its eyes rolling up into the top of its head and the smile collapsing into confusion of flaccid, drooling lips, Kate left the first surge of relief since her ordinary evening of waitressing had turned into a torture test. Following her knockout blow, Kate noted grimly that the reaction of the other gremlins was not exactly what she had expected. Humans, even construction workers, Kate thought ironically, would have laughed at the comeuppance rendered on their buddy, partly because an innate sense of justice would have been told even the vilest drunk that the grabber got what he deserved. Apparently, the gremlins didn't look at it that way, instead regarding Kate's act of self-defense as an attack on all of them. In a moment, the quasi-happy jabbering changed into an ominous rumble as the gremlins angrily debated what to do with this evil person. "Lele," he shouted angrily. "Voldemort!" Uh-oh, Kate thought, quickly picking up the drift of her muttering. Unless I missed my guess, they're talking about me. Looks like it's match time. She hastily began tearing the matches from the books and putting them in an ashtray, shielding her actions by leaning against the cash register. It was while fumblingly doing this that she saw the camera. It was Dory's Instamatic, carefully stashed out of sight behind the register, and it had a flash cube. A perfect offensive weapon that could open a pathway out of captivity. She grabbed it, with a quick, compulsive gesture that was not lost on the gremlins at the bar. There was no time to plan the best way out or gain a head start before using the flash cube. In fact, the hordes were already pouring over the counter so fast, Kate barely had time to get the camera in position, find the button, and push. Her mind wasn't even allowed a moment for dubious luxury of agonizing over the possibility the device wouldn't work. Fiek! Fiek! It's a shudder. Who is shut up. Who is correcting my shillelaghs? Shh. Both of you shut up. Fick! A sudden burst of light from the flashbulb created an immediate vacuum at the bar, gremlins tumbling backward and over each other in a reaction to the pain. Kate used the precious seconds of chaos to race to her right and fling herself around the right side of the counter. There she ran into a new group of angry gremlins. A second explosion of light gouged a 6-foot wedge of empty space ahead of her. She plunged forward, trying not to notice the clutching claws immediately behind her. Now the green creatures were immobilized by fury, their screeching chorus swirling around Kate like vaporized hatred. As she advanced spastically towards the front door, she realized that they had no intention of taking prisoners in this small but bitter conflict. Blocked once more by a new curtain of green-brown bodies and vengeful eyes, but now within the sight of the exit, she pushed the button again. Tick! She ran suicidally. Thank God, she thought. It worked. Struggling forward into the temporary no-man's land, she stumbled into the foyer. A split second later, gremlins were all about her, screaming and clawing. She could feel pinpricks of pain all over her body as they fought to get a good claw's grip on her. One hand against the wall to keep from falling, she brought the camera forward again. Let it work one more time. She prayed, just once. The camera clicked, but this time there was no detonation of brightness, no howl of pain and rage from the enemy, no recoiling in terror away from her. Instead, they surged forward around their target like waves breaking over a rock. Kate let go of the camera, heard herself scream, could not help falling forward into the turgid green sea with its clawed wavelets reaching for her. Even as she fell, Kate saw a huge flash of light against the foyer wall. Their giggles of vengeful glee turning into shrieks of pain, the gremlins scattered to the shadows, leaving Kate alone on the floor. Her torn clothes and body bathed in a trapezoidal pattern of illumination shaped by the front windows. For a moment, Kate's numbed mind worked sluggishly. Had the fall somehow triggered the flash cube? Then, as she freed herself from the shock of the past few moments, she realized the lights came from outside. From the headlights of the car were pointed directly into the building. Not knowing how long these saving beams would last, she scrambled to her feet as quickly as she could and raced for the door. Outside, a figure had just gotten out of the car, called her by name in a familiar voice. "Billy!" Kate shouted back. "Are you all right?" he asked, folding his arms around her as she ran towards him. "I think so, but those things, how many are there?" "I don't know," Billy replied. "They're everywhere. I thought they'd gotten to you." "Me too. Who else?" "We don't have time to stand here and talk about it," Billy said. "We gotta get help. I don't know who—" He spoke. The idling VW started to miss, its rhythm punctuated by heavy lurches and a slamming sound from the rear. Leaping into the car, Billy stabbed at the gas pedal, but in his haste gave the engine too much fuel. With a single gag, it died. "Not now," Billy swore. Kate got in beside him. "Is it all right?" she asked. "I'd like to get away from here soon." "It's temperamental," Billy replied, turning the key. When the engine failed to start immediately, he turned off the lights and sat back. "What are you doing?" Kate whispered angrily. "Giving up?" "No, it's just that it may be flooded, so it's best to wait a minute or two." "But the lights?" "Leaving them on will wear down the A beer bottle slammed against the windshield, creating a spiderweb of broken glass and frightening Kate and Billy nearly out of their wits. "That's why I asked about the lights," Kate murmured. "It's the only thing keeping them away." Another heavy object smashed into the windshield. "Maybe we better run," Kate suggested. "Just a second," Billy said. Turning the ignition key once again, he ground away for nearly a minute without success. Meanwhile, a hail of ashtrays, bottles, and pool table accessories bounced off the hood or clunked against the side of the car. "Yeah," Billy said finally. "You're right." Reaching into the back of the car, he grabbed the knapsack with such a jerk that Gizmo nearly fell completely out, his fall being broken only by his feet being tangled in the strap. Grumbling in Mogwai like a bitch-ass fucking Howie Mandel, he ducked back inside and then reemerged, only to tip of his nose and eyes showing. Not recognizing Gizmo in the darkness, Kate recoiled, thinking the car had been infiltrated by gremlins. "It's okay," Billy said. "It's only Giz. Let's go." Getting out of the car, they dashed through the barrage of objects flying from the tavern, pausing only when they had to cross the street. They looked at each other and smiled, both realizing at the same time that they were just outside the bank, the door of which was open. "Can you beat that?" Billy said. "They even found a way to get in the bank after closing hours." "Maybe we'd better check and see if everything's all right," Kate suggested. Billy nodded. They went inside and turned on the lights, which caused a scurrying of feet out the back door. In the harsh glow of the overhead incandescent lights, the vandalized bank looked as if a typhoon had been passed through. All of the teller windows were broken, pieces of furniture lay on their sides, cash drawers were open, and money of all denominations was everywhere. "I guess they figured it was just useless paper to them," Billy said. "And to make sure it was useless to everyone else, they tore all the bills in pieces," Kate pointed out, picking up several mutilated dollars and then letting them fall back to the floor. "Boy, I think I'll quit this job," she added, looking around to the monetary mass. "We'll never get this to a tally." "Yeah." A soft moan echoed through the bank, causing them to exchange chilled expressions. "Who's there?" a distant voice asked. "I can hear somebody. May I be of assistance?" "Sounds like Jer," Billy remarked. Kate nodded. "We're not in business yet, but it's all right to come and chat," Gerald Hopkins' voice said in an uncharacteristically agreeable tone. "He must be in the vault," Kate said. Billy took her hand, and together they walked past the executive offices to the room at the end of the corridor. Its door was ajar. "Is somebody out there?" Gerald's voice asked. He sounded distracted, sing-songy, almost drugged. Billy pushed the door open, and gingerly they entered the room. Kate gasped. The vault and anteroom were in total disarray, but that was the least terrifying element they saw. On the floor lay the inert body of Roland Corbin, his features relaxed, as if they were enjoying an afternoon nap. Kate and Billy knew immediately that he was not sleeping, however. "Poor Mr. Corbin," Kate breathed. Their eyes rising from the floor at the same time, they saw Gerald Hopkins in the background, apparently locked in the securities room of the vault, gripping the steel bars like a penitentiary inmate. He smiled out at them. "Squeeze me." "I'm so sorry," he said. "You're both too big to use this bank." "What?" Billy responded, puzzled. "This bank is for little people only," Gerald explained. He held his palm approximately waist height, and then continued in the same strange voice. "We're going to redecorate this entire bank. Lower the tellos windows, make the furniture smaller, everything so that little people will feel more at home here." He gestured grandly, but in a sort of slow motion, as if he were in a trance or dreaming.
This is going to be the first bank just for little people, he said softly. Think of it. And I'm the president.
Kate and Billy stole sidelong glances at each other.
If you ask me, I think his buttons are in the wrong buttonholes, Kate whispered. Could be, Billy replied. The world has needed a facility for little people for a long time, Gerald intoned. And now, with me as their leader, they're going to get it. Little people? Billy said. Do you mean the Gremlins? I don't know what they're called. All I know is that they talk very fast and so funny, Mr. Corbin didn't understand them, and that's why He broke off then, frowning. Yes, Billy urged. Go on. Never mind. It's too unpleasant. All I can say is that Mr. Corbin didn't want to go along with the little people. Of course, he's quite old and set in his ways. That's why he didn't understand their needs. But I did, so they established me as first president of the bank. Just as I thought, Kate whispered. He's as soft as a nickel cantaloupe.
Gerald Hopkins fixed Billy with a gaze that was somehow both intense and vacant.
You can be my head teller if you promise to be respectful to the little people, he said. Your name escapes me, but I remember your face.
With that, he threw his head back and giggled in a way that was eerily close to that of the Gremlins.
Yes, but I'll let you work for me. Minimum wage, naturally.
I can't believe this, Kate breathed, shaking her head. I told you terrible things always happen at Christmas time.
It's not the holidays' fault, Billy murmured. Now, if you'll pardon me, I have a lot of work to do, Gerald said in a more formal tone. People who will be investing in the new bank are coming soon, so I have to be ready. Would you like us to see if we can get the door open? Billy asked. No, it's perfectly all right. Good day.
He smiled blandly, but with a certain finality, and returned to the inside of the vault. Taking a seat at the small desk inside, he began writing with an instrument that, if not imaginary, was invisible to Kate and Billy.
When the Gremlins raided this place and attacked Mr. Corbin, I guess it was just too much for him, Billy said. His mind must have gone. At first I thought he was putting out an act for us, but now, poor guy. Well, Kate shrugged. At least he got his own bank now. That seems to have made him happy.
As Gerald continued working at the desk, Kate and Billy quietly left the room.
What's next? Kate asked. I don't know.
A moment later, they stood at the entrance of the bank, staring out at the deserted streets of Kingston Falls.
Where do you suppose everybody is? Kate murmured.
The town seemed like an old movie set. No sign of life, intruding on its eerie serenity. A few small lights glowed in the houses, but that was all.
Everybody must be hiding in their basements or attics until help comes, Billy suggested. Either that or they got in their cars and left.
He looked at his watch. It was 4:00.
Not very long until daybreak, he added. I wonder what the Gremlins will do when the sun comes out. Probably find a dark place, and hang out until night again, Kate said. Yeah. I think we should find a radio and see what's going on. If they haven't destroyed the station, we might find out something. Good idea, Billy seconded. Suppose we were the only ones left in town because the government decided to nuke the whole place. Wouldn't that be funny? Hilarious. I think there's a radio in Mr. Corbin's office. Yes.
They went back into the bank and rooted through the debris. Mr. Corbin's desk radio had been smashed and its cord chewed to a frazzle. But in one drawer, they were finding small transistor radios the bank used as gifts for new accounts. One of them still worked. Pete, stay in your homes until the official all clear is given. Lieutenant General David Green of the United States Marine Barracks at Phoenix is here now and has agreed to make the valuable minute of his time in order to explain what his troops are already standing by near Kingston Falls are going to do. General Green? Thank you, Harmon. First of all, we're urging everyone to stay indoors. That will make our job a whole lot easier. You see, we don't really know what these small creatures are, having only just arrived and having nothing but reports to go on. Now, they could be masqueraders for a new form of life of an alien galaxy. That's a long shot, but we like to be flexible. That's why we're not coming to New York town with flamethrowers and machine guns and rocket launchers. We don't want to destroy property or endanger lives. And we want to take these animals or people alive. That sounds like a good juggling act, General Green. How do you plan to do that, sir? Well, we plan to literally flush these invaders or troublemakers into the open. You see, rather than rely on weaponry, we procured and brought us several huge portable pumps and fire hoses. What we'll be doing in about 30 minutes, as soon as our pumps are loaded, is go from building to building looking for these things. When we find them, instead of firing on them or taking a chance of having them injure our men, we intend to turn our hoses on and round them up that way. You know, there's a lot you can do with a heavy stream of water directed the right way. That sounds like a terrific plan, General Green.
Terrific, Billy exploded. It's terrible. If they come here with those hoses and spray a lot of water around, we'll have millions of gremlins instead of a few hundred. Then we've got to head off those soldiers, Kate said calmly. Take them out of it. Have you ever tried to talk a general out of a plan he's devised? No. Have you? No, but in the movies, it never works. Maybe this time it will be different. After all, Billy, you know more than they do. Yeah, I know, Billy said. It is my fault. I'm to blame for this whole...
Yes, the military is always fucking shit up.
There's no time to worry about blame now. There's no time to worry about blame now. If you're going to talk these troops out of using water, maybe you should have a better plan for how to round up the gremlins.
Billy sighed, nodded. They were at the entrance of the bank again. Billy looked both ways out on Main Street, scratched his head thoughtfully.
Wait a minute, he said finally. Where are the gremlins anyway? The same as before, I suppose, Kate replied. Going from building to building. But there's nothing moving. I don't see or hear anything. Do you? No, now that you mention it.
Billy hopped off the sidewalk and began walking quickly in the direction of Dory's pub. Kate followed.
Where are you going? She asked when she caught up with him. Not back in pub, I hope. Yeah. Why? Just a hunch.
Her features reflecting her anxiety, Kate trailed behind him. She had no desire to return to Dory's if these creatures were still inside. On the other hand, if she had an idea of how to get rid of the greenies and needed her help, she had no alternative but to go without him. And despite the perils she had been through, there was still something in her that rose to the challenge when her courage was tested.
Do you have a flashlight in your car? She asked. Good idea, Billy said.
Oh boy. The battered VW was still there at curbside, looking worse than ever as the centerpiece of the garbage shower hurled at it from the pub. Billy reached inside the car and found the flashlight on the seat, which glowed yellowishly.
I'd estimate we have less than a minute's life left in that thing, Kate predicted. That may be just enough, he said.
Billy in the lead, they edged their way into the foyer of the pub. Every second, Kate expected to be engulfed by either a new barrage of missiles or by the gremlins themselves, their claws flashing. She doubted that the flashlight would be much help in deterring a gremlin attack, its weak beam projecting only a few feet into the darkness. When no assault came, she began to feel better, especially when they turned to the corner and moved into the main lounge area. There, by the subdued, indirect lighting of that room, they saw wreckage and destruction of monumental proportions. But there wasn't a single gremlin in sight. Billy looked around, whistled softly as his eyes took in the wall-to-wall panorama of vandalism.
Poor Dory, he said softly. What do you mean, poor Dory? Kate protested with a bit of a laugh. It was almost poor me. But for the grace of God, I could be one of those piles of trash. Squeezing his arm, she quickly added, and thanks to you, of course.
Billy's expression was a mixture of pleasure and mild embarrassment. They stood silently for a while. Finally, Billy said,
Well, where do you suppose they all went? Beats me, Kate shrugged.
They walked back outside, stood on the sidewalk, and continued their puzzled surveillance of Kingston Falls' forsaken small town area. Billy wondered how long it would be before the Marines showed up with their fire hoses. Perhaps they were already inspecting homes and buildings by the far end of town. Still hoping to first locate the gremlins and then find a way of dealing with them, he closed his eyes, straining his mind to think.
Where would I go if I were a gremlin? He said aloud. A gremlin who's afraid of bright light, with sunrise on the way, Kate added. Good, he said. That's important, I guess. Putting myself in their place. I try to find a big building, with no windows so I could hide. You know, they tend to stick together. I'll bet if we can find one of them, that's where they'll all be. So, how many buildings can there be without windows? Kate asked. Just 2, and they're both at the end of the block.
Billy started to run, then spun and hopped into the VW, giving the key a turn just as the off chance the engine would turn over. It did. Kate hopped in beside him. A minute later, they slowed the car as they moved through the intersection of Main and Garfield. On one corner was a Colony movie theater, its marquee still advertising, Now White and the Seven Dwarfs. On the adjacent corner was the Montgomery Ward department store. One of the entrance doors to Montgomery Ward hung open as the evidence of the fact that sometime during the night, some gremlins had found their way inside. Billy parked the car and got out. He was frankly undecided as to which building to try first, until he noticed that Gizmo's head was completely out of the knapsack, his nose twitching nervously. Which one, Giz? Billy asked. Gizmo peered anxiously, but meaningfully, at the movie theater. Then let's go, Billy said. It soon became evident that Gizmo's nose was working well, for as they neared the theater, they saw countless gremlins' claw prints in front. Other evidence of the devilish creature's presence could be seen in the numerous bits of vandalism, broken glass, a door hanging askew from a single hinge, 3-pronged scratches along the walls. I guess this is the place, all right, Kate said, surveying the damage. Gizmo waved his arms, put one paw over his mouth, and cocked an ear. From inside the theater emanated a continuous rush of sound made up of giggles, yelps, and conversational jabber in more or less equal parts. Sounds loud enough to be all of them, Billy said hopefully. Well, now that we found them, what do we do about it? Kate asked. I'm thinking. Negotiating their way between bits of glass and overturned lobby furniture and ashtrays, they moved quietly into the deserted lobby, the floor of which was littered with crumpled wads of paper, popcorn, and torn candy wrappers. They sure are sloppy eaters, Kate observed. Of course, it must be hard to eat popcorn with fangs like theirs, that they're so far apart, keeps falling out the spaces. Another thing I noticed about them. As Kate's voice grew in volume, Billy looked at her but sharply. I'm sorry, she whispered. I guess I'm rambling on because I'm nervous. Just the thought of these guys coming at me again gives me the creeps. Billy nodded. I understand.
I'll be quiet, she promised.
Huddled near the back of the lobby, the three listened to the babble of gremlin voices for a long moment. Kate wondered if they were involved in a heated discussion of some issue or were just conversing idly. From their previous experience with them, she knew they were intelligent creatures, diabolically so. Did they now know that they faced a crisis with the approach of dawn? If so, were they working up a plan of action in the event that they would be discovered and attacked? At that moment, Kate would gladly have given a month's pay to understand what they were saying. But that was impossible, of course.
Couldn't we just bolt the doors? Or nail them shut?
She finally whispered to Billy.
That would keep them inside until help came.
It's an idea, but I don't think it'll work, he replied. Some doors are off the hinges. The glass is cracked or broken. If we tried to fix that, it'd probably be discovered before we finished. But there is one possibility.
Grabbing her suddenly by the arm, Billy pulled Kate around the corner of the vending machine and put his finger to his lips. Clawed feet could be heard scratching on the tile floor of the lobby, but it was only one set. Billy noted thankfully, hoping the thump of his beating heart didn't carry across the room.
Yeah.
My throat's a little hurt. A moment later, when the sounds of footsteps stopped, Billy and Kate peeked around the edge of the machine. The gremlin with the flowing white mane was scooping up the last of the popcorn from the front and corners of the glass display case, slurping noisily as he shoveled pieces into his mouth. After a gigantic belch, he shuffled back into the auditorium.
That was Stripe, Billy said. He's the smartest of the bunch, and probably their leader, unless I miss my guess. Now, what was the other possibility?
Kate asked.
Blowing them up,
Billy replied. With what? Do you happen to have a few sticks of dynamite in the car?
Billy shook his head.
Maybe something better. I used to work in this theater just after high school. If it still has the same boiler problems, we may be in business.
I don't get you.
The boiler kept building up pressure, Billy explained. But the fella who owned the place was too cheap to install a new one. Instead, he put on his release valve. We had to check at least 3 times a day to make sure it was still working. He kept saying that if anything happened to that valve, we'd all be blown to kingdom come.
Suppose the valve's disconnected or turned off,
Kate asked.
Like the old man said, I guess, Billy murmured. Poof!
Okay, but will it be seconds, minutes, hours, or days before the explosion?
He didn't say.
That's too bad, because it's important, don't you think? If it's a matter of seconds, we'll check out with the gremlins.
Billy nodded.
Yeah, I think there'll be time, though. At least a couple minutes. But that's my problem, not yours.
What do you mean?
I mean, there's no reason all of us should go down to the boiler room. As a matter of fact, 2 bodies will make twice as much noise.
But you may need help.
What kind of help?
Somebody hold the flashlight while you work. It's not much light, but it may be the difference between getting the job done quickly and fumbling around in the dark.
Yeah,
Billy admitted.
But...
No more debate, okay?
Kate interrupted.
Now let's go before I lose my nerve.
All right, you take Gizmo.
Handing the knapsack to Kate, he led her across the lobby to the maintenance room door. It was locked.
Does this mean our demolition derby's off?
Kate asked, disappointed and hope mingling in her voice. Excuse me.
No, there's another way to get to the basement, but we'll have to cross the back of the balcony.
Uh-oh.
I couldn't have said it better myself. You ready?
As I'll ever be.
Staying close to the wall, Billy led the way up the balcony stairs. At the top, he put his hand on Kate's arm, indicating that she would have to keep her head down while crossing the back of the balcony. The seats were not as high as he remembered them to be, nor was the rear aisleway as wide. Thus they were forced to move with heads nearly between their knees, a torturous duck waddle through the darkness.
Above and in front of them, the gremlin chatter continued. Occasionally, a piece of popcorn or a crumpled cardboard box landed on their shoulders or caromed off the nearby wall. But they finally arrived at the opposite side of the balcony and the red door with the black stenciling that read Employees Only. Stretched out nearly prone, Billy eased the door ajar and held it open so Kate could enter. He then followed, breathing a deep sigh of relief now that they had some space between themselves and the gremlins. A narrow spiral staircase whirlpooled downward into the darkness of the basement. Kate and Billy half slid, half fell down the musty metal steps, using the flashlight sparingly in order to save the weak batteries. When they reached the bottom, Billy took the lead again, groping his way into the boiler room.
Turn on the light,
he whispered. I think the valve should be around here. The pale light moving back and forth across the ceiling revealed a tangle of electrical wires, electrical cables, joists, pipes, decomposing insulation, and finally, the release valve Billy remembered so well.
It's still there,
he said, grinning. Moving a few feet away from the boiler itself, he smiled broadly when he saw the pressure gauge. And it's really high.
And it's really high,
he added, even with the release valve working.
Great,
Kate said sardonically.
Maybe it'll blow us so fast we won't even be able to make it back across the balcony.
We won't have to do that, he said. There's a small door out the basement that works only from the inside. We'll be able to use that. Grabbing a wrench from the top of the boiler, he could return to the release valve. We had to make sure this stayed open, he explained as he began working. But it couldn't be too far open, or steam would escape into the basement and theater. Now let's see what happens when she's closed all the way. Working the wrench quickly and efficiently as Kate held the light, he twisted the valve until it refused to turn another fraction of an inch. Now let's get out of here, he followed. Kate, needing no urging, followed, wrapping her head and elbows several times as they rushed precipitously across the low-ceilinged roof jammed with crates and boxes. Above them, a steady rumble, punctuated by occasionally loud raps, indicated that the restless gremlins were still twisting, turning, and jabbering in their seats. Ahead of them, a recess in the corner of the room held a narrow metal door, rusty at the corners. Billy reached it first, gave it a strong push. No, he cried out. No!
It's not locked,
Kate whispered, horrified. It can't be. He slammed his shoulder against the door again, but it refused to open. I guess it's just stuck, he said, attacking it once more. It hasn't been used for a long time.
Are you sure it opens out?
Kate asked. In the darkness, it was difficult to see how the door was mounted. Yeah, he replied. I used it once. Searching about for something, anything to help him with, Kate's hand fell on the cold metal object.
Try this,
she said. Excuse again. Billy took the crowbar with a little smile of thanks, wedged the end of it near the upper corner, and pushed with all his might. The door moved outward grudgingly, a crack of perhaps a half-inch appearing. Encouraged, but rapidly becoming exhausted, Billy moved the crowbar down and pushed again. Finally, after a half-dozen solid thrusts, the door sprang open with a rusty yawning sound. Outside, it was considerably lighter than it had been when they entered the theater. Most of the stars had vanished in the first glow of dawn. This way! Hurry! Billy said, grabbing Kate's hand and leading her to the right. Still holding the crowbar, he paused to insert it through the handles of the theater's rear exit doors, then raced towards a small alleyway to cross the street. Suppose it doesn't, Kate began. Her question was choked off by a muffled crash, then a grinding noise so loud it seemed as if the machinery in the world were breaking down at once. A split second later, a huge flash of flame arced from the basement level to the roof in one upside-down lightning stroke, sending smaller crimson explosions leaping outward. 3 blasts followed in quick succession, forcing the theater's side open outward and then shattering it like an oil tanker being torpedoed.
In hardly more than a minute, the structure was converted into a vast brazier of fire, rapidly becoming obscured under impenetrable pall of smoke and dust.
It worked,
Billy said. Kate, smiling at his masterstroke of understanding, could only nod. Their initial rush of exhilaration was dampened at a moment later, when the holes in the theater wall they could see were forming. Then, through the holes in the theater wall, they could see the forms of struggling, dying gremlins, gristly dancing silhouettes, rising briefly from the flames, only to sink back a moment later.
Why did we have to do that?
Kate asked, looking away. Billy didn't answer. No doubt he would think about it later, but for the moment he was intent on making sure that the job, albeit unpleasant, was at least complete. Their position in the alleyway was perfect for watching all three exits. Kate's eyes were downcast, and Gizmo ducked down into the knapsack to avoid the flames. But Billy's eyes remained riveted on all three exits. Another few minutes passed. The roar, at first so loud it seemed in back of them as well as in front, gradually diminished to a steady hiss. All signs of movement within the theater also disappeared.
I think maybe we got all of them,
Billy said finally. But the words were hardly out of his mouth when a single figure stumbled through the charred front door of the rapidly deteriorating structure, stood for a moment as if in shock, then shook its white-maned head and padded across the street.
No,
Billy heard himself say.
No, no, no.
End o chapter. Trying to drink this tea and not get all gassy.
Not to burp so much. Burp the baby.
Chapter 19.
Well, they're not going to keep me from my own home.
Let's see what that voice. Rand Pelzer shouted over his shoulder as they trotted out of the all-night gas station towards his car. The attendant didn't deserve being yelled at, Rand thought, especially since he was offering friendly advice. But it had been a harrowing night, and Rand's nerves were just about shot. The tension had begun during the sales meeting, when he became concerned about getting home on the snow-covered roads. Concern turned to worry when he was unable to get a call through to Lynn, and worry turned to near panic when he began hearing the reports of the strange happenings in and around Kingston Falls. Shortly after midnight, Rand decided he could not stick to his original, no doubt sensible plan of spending the night at a motel, so that the crews would have time to clear the roads. He had to find out if his loved ones were all right. A few minutes later, as the last salespeople were scattering to their rooms or the nearest cocktail lounge, Rand had gotten in his car and headed home. After the stop for gas, where he received a running account of the troubles in Kingston Falls, along with a recapitulation of the official warning that visitors should stay out of town if possible, Rand stopped by Lynn's mother's house. She wasn't enjoying at being awkward at such an ungodly hour, but understood that Barney had to be picked up and taken home. Realizing his mother-in-law had gone to bed very early and was unaware of the troubles in Kingston Falls, Rand decided not to cause her unnecessary worry. Apologizing for his late arrival, he took the dog and said nothing more. Putting Barney in the front seat beside him, Rand set out again for Kingston Falls, hoping he would be able to get there by 2 a.m. The journey seemed interminable. Rand had never enjoyed driving in the snow. In fact, he hated it and avoided doing so whenever possible, even if the skies were clear. Fighting bad driving conditions alone at night was unthinkable, except in the case of an emergency, such as this one. Nevertheless, 20 miles down the highway, he began to wonder if he had done the right thing. One detour after another sprang up, so deflecting him from his destination that several times he had to consult the road map to see where he was. Twice he had made wrong turns because of poor visibility. Once more because a road sign was turned the wrong way, and another time because a military policeman ordered him onto a side road he had no intention of taking. Although the increasingly desperate journey, his car radio issued a string of bulletins that were hardly designed to assure him everything was all right at home. Futterman, dead. Mrs. Deagle, dead. Stores and offices he had visited only days before, nearly torn to pieces by unknown forces. Rumors of tiny but fierce aliens ransacking the town and attacking people. Most forms of communication out or intermittent at best. The majority of the town's population either hiding or on the road, fleeing like refugees during wartime. Marines on the way. Continued urgings not to be alarmed seemed not only to increase his insecurity, rather than assuage it. It seemed so hideously incredible. Little did he realize that solid citizen Rand Pelter was the man who was really responsible for the chaotic chain of events. Shortly after 4 o'clock, his nerves jangling from the constant frustration of the detours through the snow and uncertainty of not knowing how Lynn and Billy were, he pulled off Highway 46 onto Main Street, approaching Kingston Falls from the south rather than the east, his normal route. Just ahead, he could see an orange glow and considerable smoke, a situation made even scarier by the absence of fire engines, sirens, curious spectators, or traffic control guards. It was, as far as he could see, a major fire that was burning itself out while the town's population, official and otherwise, simply ignored it. Or, he thought, perhaps there was no population. No, he prayed. Let them be all right, please. He wanted to append the promise of some change in himself as payment of his prayer were answered. But for the life of him, Rand couldn't think of a thing God might want from him. I'll be better, he said finally. I'll go to church every week. The fire, he noted, as he approached to within a block of it, was coming from the Colony Theater. The entire building appeared gutted. Breaking so that he could get a longer view of the burnout structure, Rand shook his head. I just don't get it, he murmured. Where is everybody? No firemen, no fire freaks, not even a looter. It's crazy. It's unreal. As he spoke, a quick and sudden movement to his right caught his eye. Crossing the street directly in his path and only a few feet from the car was a what? Hitting the brakes hard to bring the car to a complete stop, Rand wasn't sure what he had so narrowly avoided. It was small enough to be a dog, but walked upright, and the face he had glimpsed was unlike anything he had seen before outside of a horror movie or at Halloween. Was this one of the tiny creatures they had described on the radio? It was gone almost before he could get a second glance, darting in front of the car at a low angle and trundling across the sidewalk to the Montgomery Ward store. In the dim early morning light, Rand saw only a greenish-brown back bristling with a sort of horny plating, the sort of side view presented by some large fish or reptile. With a quick glance over its shoulder, the creature disappeared into the department store by the open side entrance door. What's going on here? Rand demanded. What was that thing, and what's Montgomery Ward doing open at this hour? Barney, having been jolted awake by the sudden breaking of the car, broke into a loud, querulous barking when he caught sight of the gremlin. Desperately trying to get even a few inches closer to it, he broad jumped into the back seat and began clawing at the left rear window. Take it easy, boy, Rand said firmly. Whatever it is, it's not our job to track it down. His head still turned to the left in order to spot the strange creature should have come out of the store. Rand heard the running footsteps before he saw the two approaching people. When he recognized who they were, his mouth fell open, his expression a mixture of complete surprise and happiness. Billy! He shouted. Bursting from the car, he embraced his son, all the while bombarding him with questions. What's been going on here, anyway? Is your mother all right? Why are you running?
Sorry, Dad, Billy replied, pulling away. We've got to catch that. Did you see a gremlin go by?
A what? Billy explained as quickly as possible what they were chasing, not going into why. Rand pointed towards the department store door, nodding. Billy grabbed Kate's hand and started to run off, but Rand managed to get a hold of his other arm and spin him around. Wait a second, he shouted. Don't run off. I want to know how your mother is.
Okay, I think,
Billy replied, backing toward the door as he spoke.
The phone's out, but she's locked in the house. Sorry, Dad, but I've got to catch that gremlin.
Why? It looks dangerous.
It is.
Then let the cops do it.
No time.
Wait, I'll help. The offer was delivered to empty air, Billy and Kate having already disappeared into the department store. Momentarily confused and indecisive, Rand stood on the sidewalk scratching his head. He still wasn't sure what was going on, but he knew he hadn't driven all night just to be a spectator. If Billy had a problem, it was his problem too, and maybe even Barney's, Rand thought, moving quickly back to the car. Come on, boy, he said to the impatient Barney, pushing the front seat forward so the dog could jump onto the sidewalk. Let's go help Billy. As he slammed the door and started to turn away, Rand's eyes fell on an object lying in the back seat. His bathroom buddy. It was perfect now. He was sure of it. And several people at the sales meeting had expressed interest in marketing it on a major scale. Knowing that, and remembering that one door of his car was still refused to lock, he made the quick decision. Maybe I just better take this along, he said, reaching back into the back for the device. I'd sure hate to have somebody come along and steal this baby, just when she's about to make a whole lot of money for us. Holding the bathroom buddy in front of him, with both hands, rather with high port arms, he ran with surprising speed into the Montgomery Ward store, followed immediately by Barney, whose flashing eyes and agitated nose indicated he was eager for the hunt. General David Greene was starting to... Aha! Real quick. General David Greene was starting to become more than a little angry and frustrated. It was now well after 5 o'clock, and the sky was beginning to lighten considerably. For the better part of 2 hours, his men had been going from house to house and building to building in the northern section of Kingston Falls, searching for the little green monsters. Their lack of success so far had been total.
Well, what do you think, Medved?
He muttered to his aide, who was never more than 30 inches away. Major Josh Medved knew better than to respond immediately. When General Greene asked you what you thought, it meant he was going to tell you what he thought.
Tell you what I think, Greene continued. I think either this whole town's crazy, or we're in cahoots with the Gremlins. In cahoots, sir?
Medved asked, frowning. He understood exactly what the general was getting at. Any fool could tell that. But from past experience, Medved knew his superior officer appreciated thick-headedness above all other qualities.
Sure,
Greene replied.
Maybe not willingly, but I think these people may be sheltering or hiding the Gremlins. Out of fear, maybe. It was like that in Vietnam, you know. Those natives didn't help the VC because they liked them or believed in what they were doing. They were just plain scared. Yes. Yes, sir. That makes sense.
A lieutenant approached, looked around to see if the TV crew had accompanied them was shooting. They were, so he saluted smartly. Greene casually returned the salute and waited.
2 things, sir, the lieutenant said. We talked to some people in the next block who say they saw Gremlins at 3:30. They then all started to gravitate south, almost like they had an appointment. Okay, what's the second thing? Sergeant Williamson called and said a whole building's on fire down at Main and Garfield. That's south of here and at the other end of town. Could be the Gremlins are involved with that.
General Greene nodded, and the lieutenant left.
What do you think, Major Medved?
Greene asked. Major Medved pursed his lips, as if they were involved in serious cogitation.
Tell you what I think, the general said. I think we ought to stop beating the bushes out here and head for the fire where the action is. Good idea, sir.
Stripe couldn't have picked a much better spot, Billy said with a sigh. Her eyes flitting from back to side as she tried to adjust them to the darkness. Kate knew exactly what he meant. Montgomery Ward was spacious, with most of the merchandise spread over the 4-acre single-floor plan. The aisles seemed endless. Some of the store's advertisements proclaimed were a quarter-mile long and were jammed with displays. The illumination was minimal, coming now from a small amber nightlights at the intersections of aisles. "He could hide in here forever," Billy said. Kate looked up at the ceiling. Billy, immediately understanding the movement, looked up too. "Yeah," he said. "I wonder if we can find out how to turn on those overheads." "Why don't we split up?" Kate suggested. "You keep looking for Stripe, and I'll find the lights." "Good. I think they may be somewhere near the office. Do you know this store?" "Yes." "Good. Seems to me there's a room where they may have everything. Lights, PA system, burglar alarm switches, the works." "Okay. If it's there, I'll find it." "Maybe you better take Giz," Billy said, handing her the knapsack. "He'll be safer with you, and I'll be able to move around better." Gizmo peeked out of the canvas bag sadly, stretched forth a beseeching paw. "Sorry, little guy," Billy said, smiling. "I better go on this one alone." Kate and Gizmo headed in the direction of the office. Billy, noting that he was in the sporting goods department, grabbed a baseball bat from a nearby rack, tested it for heft, and then began a systematic search of the aisles. Alone in the semi-darkness of the huge store, he was suddenly apprehensive, even more so than when he and Gizmo had tracked Stripe into the YMCA building. That episode seemed a long time ago now, although the actual passage of time was less than 12 hours. During that brief period, he had learned that the essential thing about gremlins, that their mischievous pranks could lead to violence and death. Although he tried to drive that depressing thought from his mind, it was definitely with him as he walked aisle to aisle. How much better it will be. He could not help thinking, if I discover Stripe before he discovers me. And how much more unlikely, another part of his mind replied. Annoyed and distracted by his flip-flopping mental gymnastics, he forced himself to concentrate on positive methods of locating his gremlin adversary, rather than just walking along, hoping to stumble upon him. "What would I do if our places were reversed?" he asked himself. The answer seemed self-evident. "I would create a distraction so I could spring a trap." Spring a trap with what? With any hundreds of things, for the store abounded with potentially lethal weapons, especially the person who was nervous about being ambushed. That thought having entered his mind, Billy saw the possibility of sudden terror striking him from any part of the store. Remembering the sports equipment section, he envisioned himself being laid low by another baseball bat similar to the one he now carried, shot at by a rifle, struck with weights, a tennis racket, pool cue, or garroted by jump rope. Passing the automotive section, he saw it presented an equally juicy choice of weapons, including tire wrenches, snow chains, trailer hitches, shock absorbers, or decorative hubcaps. The lawn care center presented grisly death via spading fork or rake. The kitchenware threatened him with mutilation by an attacker armed with a matching steak knives or barbecue forks. Even the women's clothing section contains items that clever or desperate attacker could use to terminate him, namely spiked heels, belts, heavy handbags, or metal coat hangers. "You are letting yourself get carried away," he whispered to himself. As he spoke, he heard a whirring noise, to which was soon added a faraway metallic singing voice and the rat-a-tat of a tiny drum. A moment later, rock music augmented the mix into a swirl of overlapping sounds. Advancing cautiously, Billy peeked around the corner of the aisle into what was obviously the toy department. The floor of the entire department was alive with small mechanical devices, robots, wind-up trucks and cars, animals, dolls, and cartoon characters, each one singing or talking or making its own particular sound designed to enchant children. Now with all of them operating simultaneously in the semi-darkness of the deserted store.
The effect was eerie rather than charming, but it was difficult not to watch. In short, a genial distraction. The distraction, Billy thought, immediately before the thwack trap. His mind completed the end of the thought, even as the blindingly bright silver object passed in front of his eyes and tore into the wall behind him. Wincing in pain, Billy threw his hand into his cheek and brought down the dark, wet stain he knew was blood. Disoriented, he spun around, sensing rather than hearing the approach of another flying object. Just in time, he managed to hurl himself to the floor, the second object passing inches above his head. Thwack! Rolling behind the protection of a display at the end of the aisle, he lay on his stomach, watching the second silver object slide down the wall and come to rest on the floor beside the first missile. Both objects were members of the rotary saw blade family, one 6 and the other 8 inches in diameter. And more relatives were on the way. Giggling furiously all the while, Stripe leaped from his hiding place to unleash a deadly barrage of similar blades from a display case. Quickly shredding the trash box, Billy was partially hidden behind and very neatly decapitating him with several expertly thrown carom shots. Trapped in the corner, Billy could do little but try and deflect the hail of flying steel with the remains of the cardboard box. When the saw blades were all used, Stripe continued his attack with a variety of hammers, wrenches, small cans of paint, and just about everything he could get a grip on with his claws. Billy hurled himself backward to avoid a flying crosscut saw and slammed into a display case, which tipped and crashed over, trapping his legs beneath the shelves. Still clutching the saggy section of the trash box was a pitiful shield. He lay on his stomach in a litter of tools, accessories, and home improvement items. Stripe decided to finish him off while he had the chance. Looking about for a suitable device with which to apply the coup de grace, his eyes lit up, and they fell on a wonderfully lethal-looking heavy-duty battery. The thing was so leaden, Stripe could barely lift it, but the edge of the monster cube felt even deadlier than it looked. He could easily imagine it crushing his enemy's skull after the shortest of falls. Quickly wrestling the battery to within a few feet of his fallen foe, Stripe held it at his own chest level, poised for the descent onto the back of Billy's head. Then, suddenly dissatisfied at the short distance the battery would have to fall, and gaining killing momentum, he decided to raise it as high as possible so to strike with even greater force. Billy began to thrash, free from the pile just as Stripe got the battery above his own head. Fear that his quarry was about to escape, combined with the weight of the dense object and Stripe's lack of gripping ability, caused the battery to slip. The battery bounced off his shoulder and landed squarely on Stripe's foot. Yeah! With a howl of pain, Stripe looked down at the pulpy mass of discolored flesh and shattered bone that used to be his foot and limped away quickly. For a moment, Billy could see nothing but blackness, the battery having finally come to rest not more than an inch in front of his eyes. Pulling himself free of the wreckage, he leaped to his feet and started down the aisle after Stripe. At an intersection of 4 new aisles, he stopped and looked in all directions. But the gremlin was nowhere in sight.
Darn, he sighed. Where did he go? I sure could use those lights now. I wonder what's happening.
Gizmo shivered as he heard the noise of battle from far across the store. It sounded like someone dueling with ladders or a wall collapsing. The heavy silence that followed, however, was even more ominous, causing him to imagine all sorts of terrible things. If Billy had been victorious in that contest of flying objects, wouldn't he have cheered or shouted to Kate and himself? If the chase was still in progress, or even worse, if Billy lay injured or dying, Gizmo knew he was needed. Kate, while looking for that panel that controlled the lights, had placed the knapsack on a table just outside the store office. Gizmo knew he would be safe there, but the desire to help Billy was vastly more powerful than his sense of self-preservation. Flipping the knapsack cover down, he crawled out of the canvas bag and lowered himself to the floor. Not sure where to go, he padded along aimlessly for a short time, painfully aware of his lack of speed, another facility creator Mogterman had overlooked while putting together his species.
There has got to be a better way,
Gizmo murmured.
It'll take me years to get to the other end of the store on these legs.
Take that, Howie Mandel. He found what he was looking for a few minutes later in a tangle of wreckage on the periphery of a toy department. Its wheels were still spinning uselessly. The vehicle had become trapped in a corner. Gizmo approached it cautiously, located the on-off switch. Dang, I should go. Located the on-off switch and flipped it, causing the motor to die. Pushing it free of the fallen boxes at the end of the aisle, he rolled it to the middle of the corner and carefully pointed it in the direction he wanted to take.
Perfect,
he said proudly.
It's a perfect little...
There being no Mogwai word for car that immediately came to mind, he merely shrugged and hopped inside. The vehicle was quite sporty, nearly 2 feet long, pink with red stripes, a battery-operated replica of a Corvette Stingray. It seemed to be crying out to be test-driven. Flipping the switch to on, Gizmo was nearly jettisoned from the car by its sudden forward movement. He settled back and gained confidence during the long run down the aisleway, but found he couldn't turn the car as easily as he anticipated when he came to an intersection. The result was a collision with a display of oil cans, the pyramid collapsing a split second after being sidewiped by the Stingray. The heavy thunk of cans hitting the floor behind him caused Gizmo to breathe a sigh of relief. He vowed to take future turns more deliberately. Whirring to the end of the aisle, he turned left and headed up the next one. A jumble of fallen supplies slowed down against him considerably, but he soon regained top speed again. As he passed through the next intersection, the sight of the figure moving down the aisle to his right caused Gizmo to swerve and brake so suddenly that the car piled into a neat line of garden tools. Ducking his head, he waited patiently until the rakes and hoes finished falling around him, and then raced back towards the spot where the mysterious form had been. The trap was so perfect, and yet so simple that Stripe hardly felt the pain in his smashed foot. Because nothing complex was involved, his plan was nearly foolproof. The machine least likely to break down in one of the fewest moving parts. So too with an ambush, the simpler the better. The ambush Stripe now had in mind consisted of nothing more elaborate than a very long and narrow room with only one way in and out. There were no nooks and crannies to hide in, no cartons or boxes to use for cover, no closets to duck into. Called the Electronics Center, the room was simply a display area for several dozen television sets, home video games, and stereos, all neatly inset into the 3 walls. In the argot of the Old West, this was the box canyon in which Billy undoubtedly would come to meet his fate. At the very entrance to the room was a small closet, now occupied by Stripe. Clutched tightly to his chest were a bow and a batch of steel-tipped arrows he had found in the sporting goods department after smashing his foot. He had never used the weapon before, but knew the principle behind it. The bow and arrow being the standard primitive weapon of many galaxies, and therefore a residual, almost intuitive piece of knowledge. All that was required for his mastery of the weapon was a bit of practice, which would start as soon as the young enemy walked to the far end of the room. At that point, according to his plan, Stripe would step out of the closet and begin shooting. With nowhere to hide, Billy would eventually be hit by 1 or 2 of the arrows, and that would be that. And if the young man decided to look into the closet before going to the end of the room, so much better, Stripe thought. Then he would receive an arrow at point-blank range. The only thing lost would be the fun of using him for practice, seeing him panic and plead before succumbing to a direct hit. Waiting patiently, it was not long before Stripe heard quiet footsteps moving down the aisle toward the room. Through the crack of the barely opened door, he saw a figure hesitate a moment, and then continue walking. In the semi-darkness of the store, he could be quite near the rear wall. before realizing the room was dead end. And by then, of course, it would be too late. Opening the door a bit wider, Stripe peered out and was pleased. "Just a few steps more," he whispered. Billy went even further than that, developing an intersect in one of the pieces of equipment set into the far wall. Perfect, Stripe thought. Stepping quietly out of the closet, he notched the first of his arrows and aimed it into an imaginary X between the young man's shoulder blades. Kate was so confused she was nearly crying.
How do you work this thing anyway?
She nearly shouted. For the past few minutes, she'd been pushing various buttons on the control panel in front of her with a total lack of success. It was not, she thought angrily, a user-friendly system, not unlike the first word processor she had tried using. Instead of labeling the buttons plainly and simply according to their functions, the operator apparently had to punch an access code followed by the digit or digits programmed for each activity within the department store. Luckily, Kate had found the access code written on a piece of paper, but turning on the overhead lights was not such an easy matter. The closest she had come to it was she punched the access code and the random digits 26, which turned on a string of prominently mounted Christmas lights near the main entrance.
Well, what the heck, he said now. If 26 does something, I might as well try sequence dialing.
With that, she punched the access code, followed it with 2 and 7. Stripe pulled the bowstring as taut as he could make it, checked again to make sure his target was lined up correctly, and prepared to loose his first arrow. "Attention, please!" a loud voice suddenly announced. Shocked nearly out of his wits, Stripe jerked his arm as the arrow flew up from the bow, striking a television screen a foot above Billy's heads. "Attention, please!" the announcer continued. "The store will close in 10 minutes. Please complete any last-minute shopping you have so that our employees will be able to enjoy the rest of the evening. Thank you." Startled by both the recording announcement and the arrow crashing into the screen so close to him, Billy whirled. And he did so. As he did so, he saw Stripe knock another arrow and aim it at him. Billy attempted to dance sideways, suddenly realizing he was the main target in a shooting gallery. Stripe responded with a fierce giggle, followed him, and loosed a second arrow. It tore through Billy's jacket at the neckline.
"That was close," Billy murmured. "He's a good shot."
Already the gremlin's arm was ready for another arrow. Billy licked his lips, looked around for a possible way out, but saw nothing. His only immediate plan was to continue dodging until Stripe ran out of arrows. Either that or charge him, which was not a particularly smart and which made him a bigger target. The third arrow headed his way, quicker and more accurate than the others. Falling prone, Billy heard it speed by his ear a second before he hit the deck. Stripe giggled again, reached down for yet another arrow. While scrambling to his feet, Billy followed the movement of the gremlin's hand and saw it grab an arrow from a pile that must have been included at least 20 more. "There's no chance," Billy thought miserably. "With all those shots left, he'll get me for sure." But he could not bring himself to rush forward into the path of the flying missiles. Kate hit the stop button just as the store closing announcement ended and the ready button glowed expectantly.
"Overhead lights,"
she said, as if trying to have the panel to obey her.
"The heck with closing time. Let me have the overhead lights."
Pushing buttons furiously, she continued the numerical sequence only because she didn't know what else to do. Numbers 27 through 46 were routine announcements similar to the store's closing, and numbers 48 through 69 dealt with items currently on sale. Although she bailed out as soon as it failed to activate the lights, Kate was nearly beside herself. So much time was being wasted. Billy needed those lights, and she was powerless to find them, all because of this complicated panel. As each number activated some insipid announcement, he pounded angrily on the desk, jabbed the stop button, and tried again.
"Do it," she ordered. "Just do it."
"Men's Fruit of the Loom underwear. Now on sale for the next 10 min. Ping. A new parking lot will be open at Montgomery Ward on the WAP. Gildan spread, satin paint, now on sale. Boing. Jeans for juveniles, now black. In a way, the juxtaposition of sound and sight was so bizarre it was almost funny. Here he was, his life on the line as a primary target in the shooting gallery. All the bland accompaniment of retail voice sales pitches and announcements were choked off in mid-sentence. Except that Billy wasn't laughing. Those messages were him. A voice killed off by some unseen force just as it started to be heard. Quack! Behind him, to his right, another television screen was blasted to glass powder by the gremlin's arrow. There was no doubt now that two vital things. Stripe was having a great deal of fun. And he was expert with the bow. Billy knew instinctively that he was toying with him, puncturing TV screens nearby for the sheer joy of having it intermediate. Bits of a fun prior of sending a shaft into his back or chest. God damn it, Billy. So far, Stripe had used about half his pile of arrows, but the situation was made even worse for Billy when several shafts caromed all the way back to the shooter to be used again. Ski poles and jacket. Very deliberately, Stripe broke his pattern of 6 shots per minute and stood grinning at Billy. Still holding the bow poised for action, he first pointed at Billy with his free hand and then pointed to his own heart. Billy got the message. Sorry, friends, real quick.
Shit, man, the show is starting soon, and you don't know what to do, and you don't know who to love. Who do you love? Who do you love? Who do you fucking love, baby? Yeah. Shit, man, the show is starting soon, and you don't know what to do, and you don't know who to love. Who do you love? Who do you love? Who do you fucking love, baby? Yeah. Shit, man, the show is starting soon, and you don't know what to do, and you don't know who to love. Who do you love? Who do you love? Who do you fucking love, baby?
Sorry about that. That was, I was gonna piss my pants. Is what that was. Lordy. All right, a few more pages, my friends. A few more pages. Sorry about that. I didn't want to just leave the blank, I wanted to give y'all a little something. Billy got the message. The fun and games were over. Now Stripe was about to shoot in earnest. Taking a deep breath, lights raised. Back up, y'all. The fun and games were over, and now Stripe was about to shoot in earnest. Taking a deep breath, he stood bouncing on the balls of his feet, readying himself to move as quickly as possible in any direction. The experience of the past few minutes told him that he probably was not fast enough to avoid an arrow aimed directly at his heart. Stripe, meanwhile, was determined to end the game. Having grown weary of it, becoming used to the store's intermittent announcements, he was able to shut out the voice almost automatically. He prepared himself now, concentrating fully on lining up the target. Holy cow! Look at that! You hit him low, Barney, and I'll give him a jolt of this. Stripe, barely cognizant of the background sound and certainly not realizing its content, started to release the arrow. Quack! Plung! The erratically loosed arrow crashed into the ceiling and ricocheted onto the floor as Rand Peltzer, closing to within a few inches of the gremlin, unleashed a flume of shaving cream from the bathroom buddy. It shot like a white tornado directly into Stripe's eyes, causing him to shriek with pain. At the same time, Barney hurled himself at the creature's legs, snapping and growling. Realizing what had happened and was now had the opportunity to escape, Billy rushed forward.
His escape mission was instantaneously converted into a rescue dash, for Stripe recovered from the two-pronged attack with amazing speed. Slapping Barney aside with the heavy bow as he shook the shaving cream from his face, the gremlin grabbed an arrow, and in less than a second he had pointed it at Rand's torso, 10 feet away. Still too far away to be any help to his father, Billy could only hurl himself through the air, which was split by two simultaneous cries. No! Yeah! Suddenly, Billy realized that the overhead lights of this aisleway were on, and the cry of pain had not only come from his father, but from Stripe. Still recoiling with shock, the gremlin dropped the bow and arrow and raced off towards the adjoining aisle, which was still dark. Barney started to follow, but stopped when Billy told him to stay. Sweating profusely, Rand shook his head and smiled, looking down at the bathroom buddy in his hand. Well, I guess this was good for something after all, he said.
Thanks, Dad,
Billy said. He started to go, but his father followed. Wait a minute. That thing's dangerous? Why don't you wait for the cops?
No time.
Pointing towards the office, Billy called back over his shoulder.
Tell Kate to turn on all the lights. She's in the office.
Then he was gone, racing into the darkness towards Stripe's retreating form. When the lights went on, Gizmo was in the process of making a left turn just outside the area from which all the noise was coming. Partially blinded and gripped by a spasm of pain, he lost control of the tiny car, which raced at nearly full speed into a rack of audio tapes. Curling into a ball beneath the dashboard, Gizmo debated whether or not he should come out in the bright light and redolent pain. If he remained here, he would be all right until somebody discovered him. But of course that wouldn't help Billy. In this case, he thought, it's better to be sorry than safe. Thrusting his head back into the light, he winced, but again with the pain, the light dropped off the adjacent aisle. If he could just get there. I think they repeated a conversation. Yeah, because he's like, Dad, why don't you wait for cops? Lucky, but dumb. That was the description Kate gave. Yeah, they literally had the same combo. They literally had the thing where he's like, why don't you wait for the cops? That's why it's so similar. He literally said the same thing. Lucky, but dumb. That was the description Kate gave to her last act of the control panel, and now she was stuck with it. Totally frustrated at the array of trite announcements and failure to turn on the lights, she had abandoned her sequentially digit plan and just punched furiously at the board. Miraculously, that desperate, almost spasmodic gesture resulted in a bank of lights going on, illuminating approximately 10% of the floor area. That was the good news. The bad news was that she absolutely had no idea what numbers she had punched. If adjacent overhead light systems were activated by numbers close to the one she had punched, they were still as lost to her as before. What was it? She whispered, straining to recall where her fingers had gone. What was that number? It seemed as if there had been something in the high 90s. Once again, feeding the computer the access code, she sighed and punched 98. Ladies and gentlemen, we now direct your attention to the northernmost end of the store, where the Carol Hebel Memorial Fountain is being turned on for the day. This magnificent piece of free-form sculpture, the work of artist Donald Boudet, was constructed so that the interplay of falling water and lights would provide maximum dramatic effect. Although relatively new, the fountain is already known throughout the state as an outstanding example of art and business working together to increase your shopping pleasure. The significance of the announcements did not register with Billy until he heard the gentle burbling noise in the distance. Then, playing it back in his mind, he heard the all-important words, fountain, water. No! He yelled at the top of his lungs,
breaking stride, only to scream it again as he ran a few steps backwards.
No! Turn it off! Turn off the fountain!
He realized that Kate was too far away to hear him. But perhaps, if his father, several hundred feet behind him, heard his plea, he could relay the message. In the meantime, Stripe continued to run ahead of him, racing as fast as he could, with one foot. Billy was gaining on him, but a tiny voice in his head told him the damage had already been done. The fountain was running. There was no withdrawing the water that had fallen. Its telltale murmur was the siren song for the creature ahead who was rapidly approaching it.
Pleasure.
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 In the meantime, Stripe continued to run ahead of him. Barney, well in front of Billy, was following Stripe closely, snapping at his tail and hind legs. But that was only harassment, and what they needed now was containment. If Barney had been trained to watch or attack dog, he might have been able to restrain the gremlin. Now the most he could do was irritate and distract him while protecting himself from Stripe's slashing claws. The northern end of the store was outfitted as a sort of greenhouse, filled with flowers of all kinds along the walls, which supported a magnificent skylight, now covered by a large canvas tarpaulin. In the darkness of the flowers blended together, forming an overhanging canopy, so that moving through the entrance was rather like entering a tropical rainforest. Stripe abruptly turned at the door and gave Barney a swipe with his claws and sent the dog scurrying backwards several feet. He remained at that distance, barking ferociously. Having taken care of his canine pursuer, Stripe looked directly at Billy, giggled triumphantly, and pointed at the glistening wall of water, sheeting downward from the top of the fountain. Billy's chest seemed about to burst from exertion, but he forced himself to continue running faster, faster. Then, all of a sudden, it was too late. When Billy closed to within 20 feet of him, Stripe, taking no chances, leaped from the ledge of the fountain, teetering there one tantalizing moment, and then did a gentle backflip into the water. The sight turned Billy's legs to strands of limp spaghetti, but not mom spaghetti. Leaning against the entrance wall, he allowed himself to slide slowly to the floor. Closing his eyes, he tried not to think of the past 24 hours, but the gremlin's giggling, mixed with the sound of falling water, made it impossible to forget. 4 times he thought he had solved the problem. At home, in the YMCA, the theatre, and now here. Successful each time, except for Stripe. He took a deep breath and let the air out very slowly, although he could hear the faint popping sounds as the bubbles that would become new gremlins began to erupt from the surface of Stripe's skin. Gizmo, still at the wheel of his miniature stingray, rolled through the entrance to the greenhouse and immediately saw the worst. Billy, sitting distraught, Stripe, laughing despite the pain of reproduction, and nothing could be done to set the matter straight. Unless his gaze moved quickly from floor to ceiling. Gizmo chirped optimistically, whipped the car sharply to his right, and applied full power. One thing Mogterman had done correctly was give his creation a mind that was capable of rapidly analyzing the situation and coming up with a solution. That's why the tarpaulin, latch, and string were just objects in a big room to Billy the human, but answers to Gizmo the Mogwai. As soon as he spotted them, he knew there was a chance to pull this one out. Nearly crashing into the rear wall, he leaped from the car and raced for the spot where the rope was wound around the steel latch. It was out of his reach. Babbling in Mogwai, he pushed the stingray beneath the spot and leaped onto the hood. Working as quickly as he could with his clumsy little paws, he slowly twisted the rope free of the metal latch. The final turn released it with such force. Gizmo felt his feet lifted from the car and his body being carried upward at a breathtaking rate of speed. Closing his eyes, he let go his grip, tumbling downward onto the hood of the car and then to the floor.
Above him, he saw the canvas tarpaulin begin to roll away from the windows, the long, narrow strips sliding neatly into compartments hidden beneath the sills. As they did so, a flood of bright early morning sunlight cut a bluish-white path through the middle third of the entire greenhouse. Squarely in that path was Stripe. Magnified and focused by the window glass, the sunlight fell across the prostrate Kremlin like a superheated girder. A searing weight he was powerless to move. Nor could he move his own body, weakened as if it was by the light and the effort of reproducing new gremlin. Soon hot fluids began to ooze from his pores, eyes, and the sides of his mouth. He tried to scream, but all that emerged was a guttural moan. Trapped in their beef moment. Ain't nobody trapped in a beef moment except me. Trapped in their brief moment of vulnerability before birth, the bubbles forming on Stripe's skin smoldered, blistered, and cracked. The grisly production of both, the cool water and the hot violence of the gremlin's death, rose in a gray mist from the fountain and gradually dispersed. The final creation of the worst night in Kingston Falls history. Oh my God, I'm going to cry. We only have 4 pages left, guys.
Slashy claws.
It must be the
Sandy Claus's alter ego.
Chapter 20. By the day after Christmas, reasonably normal patterns of living had returned to the Peltzer household and most of Kingston Falls. Newspeople from all over the state continued to pick through the wreckage, not only the buildings, but of people's minds, in their efforts to dig out the grisliest details of the event. But the townspeople as a whole seemed anxious only to forget what had happened and resume their ordinary lives. Billy managed to avoid the news hounds. He did so not because of shunned publicity or notoriety, but because he knew that any exhaustive series of questions would lead to Gizmo's part in the mess. Billy wanted to avoid that at all costs. He thought it would be difficult, if not impossible, because so many people knew he was involved. But preserving his anonymity was surprisingly easy. The person who knew most about Billy's involvement, Pete Fontaine, was so terrified that he heard that Roy Hansen had been killed by the unknown creature in his lab that he ran away from home, thinking the police would connect him with the murder. Kate, of course, respected Billy's desire to be left out of it, as did his parents. Sheriff Riley and Deputy Brent conveniently forgot that they had ignored a warning from Billy, but did accept an award for meritorious service by the National Association of Chiefs of Police. General David Green appeared several times on local and national television, describing how he had relentlessly pursued the gremlins until the last one was destroyed. In any event, there being glory enough for everyone and little impetus to assign blame, Billy managed to stay out of it. As the furor began to die down, he started to believe there would be no more fallout from the gremlin invasion. He was correct, until the night after Christmas. Kate, Billy, and his parents had just finished dinner when the doorbell rang. Billy opened the door, revealing an elderly Oriental man. His expression was angry, but controlled, like a parent who must punish a child. The wind blew through his scraggly white hair, accentuating his doomsday look. Although Billy had never seen the man, he sensed immediately who he was and why he had come. "Yes," he said timorously. "I have come for Mogwai," the old Chinese man said. He looked past Billy, catching sight of Rand. Billy indicated that he should enter, and the old gentleman stepped into the room. At the sound of the old man's voice, Gizmo, seated up on the sofa, nursing his sore back, immediately perked up his ears and lunged forward. Chirping excitedly, he nearly fell off his sofa in an effort to reach the Chinese man, covering the distance in 4 big leaps. Lifting the creature and nuzzling it gently, the old man smiled slightly. I've missed you, my friend, he said. Looking at them together, Billy was both touched and saddened. He could see that they had not only love as bond, but many years of understanding and comfort. Rand, feeling she would at least state his rights, if not assert them, walked towards the Chinese man. Now, just a minute, he said softly. I paid good money for him, and my boy's quite attached to him. I did not accept the money, the Chinese said. My grandson did that, and he has been sentenced to his room for a month as a result. He reached into his coat and pulled out a roll of bills. Here is your money, he said. I did not deduct the expenses in order to find you and get here, because you lost possible interest the money would have earned if you had kept it. We've both lost and are even here. Take it, please. Rand, his gaze alternating between the Chinese man and Billy, ignored the gesture. It's not that easy, he said.
Never mind, Dad, Billy murmured. It's all right.
I warned you, the Chinese man said to Rand. Mogwai needs much responsibility, but you didn't listen.
Rand shrugged.
Well, we know.
We'll be more responsible in the future.
That is experience, not responsibility, the Chinese man corrected. Responsibility is doing the wise thing before taking punishment, not after.
Yeah, Rand muttered. Well,
Chinese philosopher once wrote, society without responsibility is society without hope, the Chinese man added.
Then he looked at Billy.
I am sorry, he said.
I'll miss him too, Billy smiled grimly. But maybe this is the best. I can visit, I hope.
The old Chinese gentleman nodded. Gizmo, nestled comfortably in the old man's arms, looked at Billy and felt a terrible surge of sadness. If only he could say the human words that would let his friend know how he felt. If only Mogterman had. A pox on Mogterman! He thought angrily. I can communicate. I must. And I will. I will project the human words and not be embarrassed if they come out gibberish. At least then, I'll know I tried my best. Closing his eyes, he concentrated deeply and powerfully for a long moment. Then his tiny mouth opened, and human words came forth, tinged with a Mogwai accent, but nevertheless completely understandable.
Bye, Billy,
Gizmo said. Billy and his parents burst into laughter and tears at the same time. Even Kate was visibly affected, though she had known Gizmo only briefly.
He talked,
Billy shouted, reaching out to kiss Gizmo on top of the head.
You have accomplished a great deal, the Chinese man said. We will always remember you.
Billy nodded, unable to speak about the lump in his throat.
Good evening,
the Chinese man said. As they went through the doorway into the cold night, Gizmo raised his paw in a little wave. Billy waved back, then shut the door quickly. He did not want to watch as they moved slowly into the darkness and out of his life. Gremlins. The book. Oh, what a book. God damn it. Yeah. Yeah, boy. Oh. And that was a super duper. A super duper. I'm not crying. You're crying. I'm not crying either. Bye, Gizmo. We love you, my friend. We love you. Yes, Fury. What do you want? Furie's coming over here because I'm making all this noise. She's like, Daddy, why? Why, Father? Why?
Oh, hi, Chalupa. Oh, hi, Fury. Oh, hi, Mark.
You be careful, sweetie. You be careful. Yes? What do you have to say, Fury? Knock stuff over with your tail and stuff. That was a good book. That was pretty darn good. I'm not gonna say the name of the next book. You're gonna have to wait till next week to find out. That is if I get it. But if not, I'll just do a different book. If not, we'll just do like some Full House or something. That would be awesome. My friends, thank you. Thank you, everyone that's been here and has joined me on this journey, this 7-part journey. Sometimes it just takes that long to get through a book. Sometimes it's just, shit happens. Life comes at you real fast. Life, yeah. See, Julie, that's what I thought was fucking cool. That's what I thought was like the very interesting part was like all the outside plot that they added in. And of course the books, they're going to do that. But like the Moctrin thing, shit, that was the coolest part. That was like, I did not realize that Mogwai were made. She's falling all over shit. I didn't realize they were made. That's freaking awesome. That's like probably one of the coolest things about it. Falling. I didn't realize they were made. That's freaking awesome. Holy crap! You probably just went through a time warp. That's what happens in a time warp. All right, y'all. Oh. Space glamour pets. Basically. Just don't get them wet. Don't feed them. Don't light them. Friends and family. Thank you. Thank you. This was... All right, let me see if this actually works. I was just singing Space Jam. So, shucks. Oh, shucks. Or it did work. All right, fuckos. I'll see you next week. Peace and love.